Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are continuing Journal Collection number 53, and we are only up to February of the year 1862. And this is one of the longer journal collections of the latter half of Emerson's career, I guess you could say. And with that, I'll go ahead and start. This entry is just generally called February, so it's not a specific date. Correctness very rare. It is difficult to get a new shirt made on the measures of the pattern. The value of a carpenter is that he is trained to measure exactly, but Captain Rich told me it is impossible to duplicate the model of a ship, and 'tis said the Emperor of Austria, though he sent an architect to Rome to get the dimensions of the Sistine Chapel, and sent Mozart to write by ear the score of the Miserere, failed at last to reproduce the perfect musical effect in Vienna. No proofreader believes that the author can correct his own proof, and I am sure no author believes that any reader of his verses will copy them accurately. An engraver like Raphael Morgan is as rare as a painter like Raphael Sanzio. The Swedenborgians say with despair that there seems a fatality to hang over Swedenborg's text, that though with honest purpose he cannot be correctly quoted by one out of their church, hence the inestimable value of photography. The Englishman in China, seeing a doubtful dish set before him, inquired, "Quack, quack?" The Chinese replied, "Bow wow." Mrs. Livermore told us of a stuttering wit in the West who was much offended with the rowdy manners of the son of a friend with whom he was talking. The father agreed he was very bad, but what could he do with him? Why, if he was my son, I'd appoint his funeral at 4 o'clock tomorrow p.m., and I'd be sure to have him ready. Everything good is the result of antagonisms, and the height of civilization is absolute self-help combined with the most generous social relation. A man must have his root in nature, draw his power directly from it, as a farmer, a miller, a smith, a shepherd, a sailor does, as Bonaparte or Archimedes or a railroad engineer or Thoreau or Agassiz does. He must be such that, set him down where you will, he shall find himself at home, shall see how he can weave his useful lines here as there, and make himself necessary to society by method in his brain. This is self-help, and this is common, but the opposite element that makes him, while he draws all values to him, feel an equal necessity to radiate or communicate all, and combine the largest accumulation with bounteous imparting, raises the useful to the heroic. As men refine, they require manners indicating the highest style of man, and as soon as they have seen this magnanimity, they exalt the saint as Saint Louis or Carlo Borromeo, or the Cid or Sir Philip Sidney, or Bayard over all the degrees in the Golden Book, and the Church with its martyrs and self-sacrificers becomes adorable in their eyes. Just in proportion as this healthy light comes upon the mind, it condemns the selfishness which accumulates and does not impart, and the ruder and grosser drone who does not even accumulate, but robs those who do. Thoreau. Perhaps his fancy for Walt Whitman grew out of his taste for wild nature, for an otter, a woodchuck, or a loon. He loved sufficiency, hated a sum that would not prove, loved Walt, and hated Alcott. Quote, "It were well if the false preacher of Christianity were always met and balked by a superior, more living, and elastic faith in his audience, just as some missionaries in India are balked by the easiness with which the Hindus believe every word of miracle and prophecy, only surprised that they are much less wonderful than those of their own scriptures, which also they implicitly believe." H.D.T. T came to see Thoreau on business, but Thoreau at once perceived that he had been drinking, and advised him to go home and cut his throat, and that speedily. T did not well know what to make of it, but went away, and Thoreau said he learned that he had been repeating it about town, which he was glad to hear, and hoped that by this time he had begun to understand what it meant. The old school of Boston citizens whom I remember in my childhood had a greater vigor, great noisy bodies, I think a certain sternatory vigor the like whereof I have not heard again. When Major B. or old Mr. T.H. took out their pocket handkerchiefs at church, it was plain they meant business. They would snort and roar through their noses like the lowing of an ox, and make all rink again. Ah, it takes a North Ender to do that. It is curious how negligent the public is of the essential qualifications of its representatives. They ask if a man is Republican, but has he a will? Can he carry his points against opposition? Probably he has not. When he finds himself at Washington with men of fixed ideas, with polite men from the Southern and Middle States, with hard-browed politicians from the border states, who have no questions about their view of the matter, and assume that any difference of opinion on your part is a momentary ignorance of the necessities of the position, your wise, honest Republican, after making a few courteous attempts at arguing the point, and finding how weak his voice is compared with theirs, settles it in his mind that 'tis of no use to talk with such people, that he can still vote against them. But those strong, well-persuaded men have just the same power in the debate as in the hotel parlor, and give the worthy representative the same mortifying sense of incapacity there, and more mortifying because his humiliation is exhibited on a public stage. Now there is no real force in the reasons of these men. If he had presence of mind and diligence to analyze their argument, he could expose its weaknesses, but they have a habitual self-reliance and a way of putting their personality over you which he has not. This evil would be diminished if he had been long used to them, had come to know how much better is their onset than their real grounds and means warrant, how ignorant and vulnerable they are. But he finds them full grown, in possession of the field, and talking down to him, and he overestimates their force. The Southerners keep their representatives in Congress for many years, and we commit the fault of sending new men every session. Holmes came out late in life with a strong sustained growth for 2 or 3 years, like old pear trees which have done nothing for 10 years, and at last begin to grow great. The Lowells come forward slowly, and Henry Thoreau remarks that men may have two growths like pears. March 3rd. The snow still lies even with the tops of the walls across the Walden road, and this afternoon I waded through the woods to my grove. A chickadee came out to greet me, flew about within reach of my hands, perched on the nearest bough, flew down into the snow, rested there 2 seconds, then up again, just over my head, and busied himself in the dead bark. I whistled to him through my teeth, and I think in response he began at once to whistle. I promised him crumbs, and must not go again to these woods without them. I suppose the best food to carry would be the meat of shagbarks or castile nuts. Thoreau tells me that they are very sociable with woodchoppers, and will take crumbs from their hands. Following this is a poem. Perched on the bough, then darts below, and wrote his mark upon the snow, whistled his notes, ran through his fine gymnastic play, head downward, clinging to the spray. The little hermit, though he live apart, hath a hospitable heart. Hastes when you pass his sylvan fort, to do the honors of his court, as fits the owner of the land. Flies round you, grazes your hand. Taught by thy heart, I to my pet hold glad remembrance of my debt, and soon again thy comrade comes, loaded with store of seeds and crumbs. Thou first, while steaming earth yields bread, in sign of honor shalt be fed. Voices have their various manners also. I remember when Greenwood began to preach, though he indulged a playful fancy that had perhaps caught its truth from Everett, yet the effect of that fine bass voice was, if he were a rocky cliff, and these pretty descriptions only flowers and colors thereon. He could well afford them, they might bloom or fade, he remained fast. Other speakers have nothing left, but put themselves entirely into their speech, as Phillips. Some voices are warnings, some voices are like the bark of a dog. Les caresses de la parole. Quote, the Cordelier said that he found that among believers or misbelievers Never kingdom ruined itself, or changed its master except by defect of justice. Now let the King of France take care to do true and prompt justice to his people, for it is thereby that our Lord will let him hold his kingdom in peace as long as he lives. Joinville. Prudency of Goodness. The illusion that strikes me as the masterpiece of Maya is the timidity with which we assert our moral sentiment. Dr. Jackson said that at Jalapa in Mexico, the quote-unquote army fuse was first used by us, or first observed by the Mexicans. 2 cannons having been left in the public square, a great crowd of Mexicans ran up to capture them. When they were all rushing up in mass, the cannons went off without any visible cannoneers, and discharged shrapnel directly into the heart of the crowd. If the cannons had begun to sing, "Oh, say do you see by the dawn's early light," they would have not been more astonished, and were quite ready to believe that bayonets think, and cannons also. Blair rightly thinks that Chase, because he was always a Whig, will not have nerve. The Unitarians, born Unitarians, have a pale, shallow religion. But the Calvinist, born and reared under his vigorous ascetic, scowling creed, and then ripened into a Unitarian, becomes powerful, as Dr. Channing, Dewey, Horace Mann, Wasson, Garrison, and others. So it is in politics. A man must have had the broad, audacious Democratic Party for his nursing mother, and be ripened into a free soiler to be efficient, as Jackson, as Benton, as Potter, Wade, Blair, Hickman, Johnson, and Boutwell were. Arabians say, quote, "The horse was created a day or two before Adam," Quote, "He fled on a mare which would catch a falling tear," Read Les Chevaux de Sahara, General Dumas' editing of what he learned from the captive emir, Abd el-Kader. Quote, "These are not courses for your horses," said Si bin Zion in conclusion. "You Christians who go from Algiers to Blida, 13 leagues, as far from my nose to my ear, and yet believe you have made something of a journey." These, rightly seen, were but superficial effects, but the credence of men it is that molds them and creates one or another surface. And the mind, as it opens, transfers very fast its choice from the circumstance to the cause, from the false to the true, from courtesy to love, from inventions to science, from law or public opinion in Washington or London to the tyrannical idea that slowly reveals itself, from all that talent executes and vaunts to the sentiment that fills the heart and dictates the future of nations. A new and purer moral sentiment civilizes civilization. I know these powers are not often entrusted to the same hand. The hands to complete are not often given to the seeing soul. The prophet is filled with vision, and careless of its slow fulfillment in events. Enough to him to behold it and announce that which must be, careless even of its distinct declaration, too happy in seeing its centrality and invincibility. What to him is its administration in the clumsy hands of dull men whom it confounds? The fire burns their hands, confounds their understandings. The higher law is a jibe. Apes and baboons chuckle and gibber over it, whilst it suffocates their laughter and decomposes them. What is a generation of able statesmen? What a democratic party or a Whig party or a strong cabinet or the largest political combination, the 4 great powers or the 5? In this august presence they are thieves. Well assured is he that what he beholds is not powerful, but power, that it measures time and fashions its instruments. Freedom does not love the hot zone. The snowflakes are the right stars of our flag, and the northern streamers the stripes. March. Whiggery. Its doctrine is, better endure tyranny according to law 1,000 years than irregular and unconstitutional happiness for a day. Of course, he had rather die in the hands of a physician than be cured by a quack. Editor's note. Here follows a newspaper cutting, President Lincoln's tentative and somewhat obscure and feeble message to Congress of March 6th, proposing a scheme of gradual emancipation as a war measure for the border states accompanied by compensation. This was rejected. End note. Strange that our government, so stupid as it is, should never blunder into a good measure. In Utah, the leading issues are not those of our national parties, yet the government invariably adopts the bad side. March. War, the searcher of character, the test of men, has tried already so many reputations, has pricked so many bladders. 'Tis like the financial crises, which, once in 10 or 20 years, comes to try the men and institutions of trade, using, like them, no ceremony, but plain laws of gravity and force to try tension and resistance. Scott, McDowell, McClellan, Fremont, Banks, Butler, and I know not how many more, are brought up, each in turn dragged up irresistibly by the anthropometer, measured and weighed, and the result proclaimed to the universe. With this dynamometer, and not so much that as rack to try the tension of your muscles and bones, standing close at hand, everybody takes the hint, drops much of brag and pretension, and shortens his speeches. The fop in the street, the beau at the ball, feels the war in the air. The examiner, the insatiate demand for reality, and becomes modest and serious. The writer is less florid, the wit is less fantastical. The epicure and the man of pleasure put some check and cover on their amusements. Everybody studies retrenchment and economy. Everybody bethinks himself how he shall behave, if worse should come to worst. It will not always serve, or may not, to stand aloof and contribute money. Should we carry on a war by subscription and politely? They will conquer who take up the bayonet, and leave their other business and apply themselves to the business of the war. The war searches character, and acquits those whom I acquit, whom life acquits, those whose reality and spontaneous honesty and singleness appear. Force it requires. 'Tis not so much that you are moral as that you are genuine, sincere, frank, and bold. I do not approve those who give money or give their voices for liberty from long habit and the feminine predominance of sentiment, but the rough Democrat who hates Garrison but detests these Southern traitors. The first class will go in the right way, but they are devoured by sentiments like premature fruit ripened by the worm. The labial speech, instead of the stomachic, afflicts me in all the poetry I read, even though on a gay or a trifling subject. Why has never the poorest country college offered me a professorship of rhetoric? I think I could have taught an orator, though I am none. March 24th. Sam Staples yesterday had been to see Henry Thoreau. Never spent an hour with more satisfaction. Never saw a man dying with so much pleasure and peace. Thinks that very few men in Concord knew Mr. Thoreau, finds him serene and happy. Henry praised to me lately the manners of an old established, calm, well-behaved river, as perfectly distinguished from those of a new river. A new river is a torrent, an old one slow and steadily supplied. What happens in any part of the old river relates to what befalls in every other part of it. 'Tis full of compensations, resources, and reserve funds. When we have a success, I wrote, it is because our adversary has made a fault. I hate that we should be saved only as Providence takes care of idiots and drunkards, or as we say, fortune favors fools. Quote, "The universe," said Newton, "was produced at a single cast," from St. Pierre. Eliot Cabot quotes to me from Mommsen, who is full of good sayings. And then there is a German sentence here untranslated. The somnambulic security which makes the poet a poet. C. G. Leland writes to me the name of the author of The Old Cove is Henry Howard Brownell of East Hartford, Connecticut. April 2nd. Yesterday I walked across Walden Pond. Today I walked across it again. I fancied it was late in the season to do this, but Mr. Thoreau told me this afternoon that he had known the ice to hold to the 18th of April. April 9th. The cold days have again arrested the melting of the ice, and yesterday I walked again across the middle of Walden, from one side to the other. April 10th. Today I crossed it again on foot. The valuable part of Cottle's Reminiscences is the account of John Henderson, the wonderful scholar, born at Limerick, Ireland, who died at Oxford in 1788, in the 32nd year of his age. We should have an adequate sketch of Coates, of Chatterton, of Ferriabi. Spring. Why complain of the cold, slow spring? The bluebirds don't complain. The blackbirds make the maples ring with the social cheer and jubilee. The robins know the snow must go, and sparrows, with prophetic eye, that these bare osiers yet will hide their future nests in the pride of their foliage. And you alone, with all your 6 feet of experience, are the fool of the cold of the present moment, and cannot see the southing of the sun. Besides, the snowflake is freedom's star. See a political description of a calm at sea in Dyer's poems. Criticism. 'Tis objected to Florian that there is no wolf in the story. Marie Antoinette said she felt as if eating milk porridge. April 16th. Heard the purple finch this morning for the first time this season. Henry Thoreau told me he found the blue snowbird at Monadnock where it breeds. It is never seen here in summer. Red-winged blackbird sings gurgly, and the grackle talks with it hoarsely. Later, Edward says he found the eggs of the Fringilla himelis on Monadnock in July. April 18th. The ice not broken up on Walden this very warm day, though I could not get out on it from Wyman's Cottage landing. Mr. Channing was on the ice yesterday. Addison Fay tells me that the expenditure of gunpowder in war does not compare in amount with that of peace. Resources. I have earlier indicated some of my pastimes instead of whist and hunting. The chapter of these, however, is much longer and should be most select. The first care of a man settling in the country should be to open the face of the earth to himself by a little knowledge of nature, or a great deal of knowledge, if he can, of birds, plants, and astronomy, in short, the art of taking a walk. May. Of the most romantic fact, the memory is more romantic. See Cowper's Ice Palace of Moscow. Editor's note. Thoreau had written to a friend early in the spring, I suppose I have not many months to live, but of course I know nothing about it. I may add that I am enjoying existence as much as ever and regret nothing. He died on May 6th. The funeral ceremonies took place in the Unitarian Church. His neighbor, Reverend Grindal Reynolds, made the prayer, Mr. Emerson the address, printed in lectures and biographical sketches, and a poem written by his friend Channing was sung. Thomas Cholmondeley, an Englishman from Shropshire, friend of Clough at Oxford, but who had lived for years in New Zealand, came to Concord with a letter to Mr. Emerson in 1854. During his stay of some months in Concord, he boarded with Thoreau's parents, and soon formed a strong friendship for him. He was quiet, open-minded, and brave, and before the end of the year returned to England to serve in the Crimean War. Just before sailing with his regiment, knowing Thoreau's interest in Hindu scriptures, he sent him a large number of Oriental works as a farewell gift. Thoreau bequeathed part of these to Harvard College Library and part to Mr. Emerson. Cholmondeley returned unscathed from the war, once more came to Concord for a short visit after his stay in Canada, and then returned to England. He died in Florence 2 years after Thoreau's death. A very interesting correspondence between the friends was published by Mr. F. B. Sanborn, quote, Thoreau and his English friends Thomas Cholmondeley, in the Atlantic Monthly, volume 72, page 741. End note. Books bequeathed to me by Henry David Thoreau. Rig Veda Sanhita, First Ashtaka, Volume 1, 1850. Second Ashtaka, Volume 2, 1854, translated by H. H. Wilson. Sankhya Karika, translated by H. T. Colebrook, and the Bhashya or Commentary of Garupada, translated by H. H. Wilson, Oxford, 1837. Lotus de la Bonne Loi, traduit du Sanskrit par M. E. Burnouf, Quarto, Paris, 1852. Le Bhagavad Purana, traduit par M. E. Burnouf, 3 volumes, Quarto, Paris, 1840 to 1848. Institutes of Menu, translated by Sir William Jones, 1 volume, Quarto, London, 1825. Treatise on the Hindu Law of Inheritance, translated by H. T. Colebrook, 1 volume, Quarto, Calcutta, 1810. Select Specimens of the Theatre of the Hindus, translated from the Sanskrit by H. H. Wilson in 2 volumes, 8vo, London, 1835. Volume 15 of the Bibliotheca Indica, translated by E. Rohr, Calcutta, 1853. Upanishad. Aphorisms of the Nyaya by Gautama, English translation, 1 volume, 12º, Allahabad, 1860. Colebrook's Miscellaneous Essays, Volume 1 and 2. Vishnu Purana, translated from the Sanskrit by H. H. Wilson, 1 volume, Quarto, London, 1840. Nala and Damayanti, translated by Rev. H. H. Millman, 1 volume, 8vo, 1835. Aphorisms of the Mimamsa by Jaimini Sanskrit and English, 1857, pamphlet. Lecture on the Vedanta, pamphlet, 1860. Bhashya Parichacheda, pamphlet, 1851. May 25th. Romance. Harriet Prescott has the courage of genius, as Elizabeth Shepherd had, whom she celebrates. It is an easy list to count off, our romantic writers: Bettine von Arnim, George Borrow, Elizabeth Shepherd. There is too much vulgarity in Disraeli than that I should willingly add his name for all the golden thread that he has woven into his diaper. Goethe only vitiates his claim to romance by his largeness, and by having valued himself more on his other and conventional merits. But the effect and the test of my romanticists is that they move me precisely as true poets do, as Merlin, Taliesin, or these few golden sentences that have come to me from the bards. Much mischief from the Negro race. We pretended to Christianize them, but they heathenized us. The Supreme Court, under Southern dictation, pronounced that the Negro had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. Today, by the rebellion, the same rule holds and is worked against the Southerner. The rebel has no rights which Negro or white man is bound to respect. The world is upside down when this dictum comes from the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States of America. Resources or feats. I like people who can do things. When Edward and I struggled in vain to drag our big calf into the barn, the Irish girl put her finger into the calf's mouth and led her in directly. When you find your boat full of water at the shore of the pond and strive to drag it ashore to empty it, Tom puts a round stick underneath, and 'tis on wheels directly. June 6th. Romance. If we could tell accurately the evanescing effects of an imaginative book on us as we read. Thus Millman's translation of Nala and Damayanti is nearer to my business and bosom than is news in today's Boston Journal, and I am admonished and comforted as I read. It all very nearly concerns me. We are elevated by beauty. I walk in marble galleries and talk with kings the while. To my chapter on the celebration of intellect belongs the incident of Nala's exchange of his skill in horses for Rituparna's skill in dice or in mathematics. Holes. The correspondence or balance everywhere. If the host has duties, so has the guest. If I received good news every day, and give none of myself, I am in false position. I am a consumer and not a producer. What right has anyone to read in the journal accounts of victories if he has not bought them by his own valor, treasure, or personal sacrifice, or by service as good in his own department? Beware that national victories are not private defeats to you and me. A clear eye will find keeping and tie in all the circumstance, and its origin in self, will feel itself complimented equally by invitation and neglect. It is served by privacy as by crowds, itself tinges the sky with cherries and roses or with ink. In the garden put pansies that make mouths at you, every one droller and more elfish than the last, as if you had punch done in flowers. 'Tis inexcusable in a man who has messages to men, who has truths to impart to scribble flourishes. He should write that which cannot be omitted. Every sentence a cube, standing on its bottom like a die, essential and immortal. When cities are sacked and libraries burned, this book will be saved, prophetic, sacred, a book of life, for truly considered the work of writers is like that of capitalists. Carlyle's third volume of Friedrich, a masterpiece. How sovereignly written, above all literature dictating to the world below, to citizens, statesmen, scholars, and kings, what they shall think and accept as fatal and final for their salvation. It is mankind's Bill of Rights, the Magna Carta, or Declaration of Independence, or right royal proclamation of the intellect ascending the throne, announcing its good pleasure that hereafter, as heretofore, and now once for all, the world shall be governed by common sense and law of morals, or shall go to ruin. The disinfecting process, the untuning, who counts these in his economy of day and life? Yet not to count these is to estimate by shows for substances. The man McClellan ebbed like a sea. Art. Two things in picture. 1. Representation of nature, which a photograph gives better than any pencil, and a camera obscura better than a photograph, and which is a miracle of delight to every eye. 2. An ideal representation, which by selection and much omission, and by adding something not in nature, but profoundly related to the subject, and so suggesting the heart of the thing, gives a higher delight, and shows an artist, a creator. I read a good sentence of General Scott's in the newspaper that, quote, resentment is a bad basis for a campaign, end quote. June. Henry Thoreau remains erect, calm, self-subsistent before me, and I read him not only truly in his journal, but he is not long out of mind when I walk, and as today row upon the pond, he chose wisely no doubt for himself to be the bachelor of thought and nature that he was, how near to the old monks in their ascetic religion. He had no talent for wealth, and knew how to be poor without the least hint of squalor or inelegance. Perhaps he fell, all of us do, into his way of living without forecasting it too much, but approved and confirmed it with later wisdom. I find myself much approving lately the farmer's scale of living over the villagers. Plain plenty with luxury or show. This draws no wasteful company, and escapes an army of cares. What a ludicrous figure is a village gentleman defending his few rods of clover from the street boys who lose their ball in it once a day. June. I know a lady who has that sovereign sweetness of temper that she receives the simplest details of any statement from any business from woman or child with such happy anticipating intelligence that it acquires at once importance, breadth, and better intent from her welcome. Mrs. Ripley used to say in Waltham, I bless God every day for Mary Ripley's existence. So think I of my Benvenuta. Freckles are beautiful in lilies. Quote, there is sport in the boy's water-mill, which grinds no corn, and saws no logs, and yields no money, but not in the man's. Thoreau, Journal. Peter Robbins assured Henry that yesterday's rain had not reached the potatoes after all. Exorbitant potatoes, Henry adds. It takes very serious preaching to convert them. Every poet has trembled on the verge of science, Thoreau. If there is a little strut in the style of Henry, it is only from a vigor in excess of the size of his body. I see many generals without a command, besides Henry. There is somewhere a pillar of rock called Adam's Peak, but that is not the usual style of nature, not a column, not granite, beanpole, or flagstaff, but a mountain with due support. The nucleus may be a rocky shaft, but unsupported it would soon fall as a beanpole at the first storm. So it is with eminent men. A fine genius always implies some society of its mates, if unequal. What a new face courage puts on everything! 'Tis the difference of midday from midnight. Ah, the inconvertibility of the sentimentalist, the soul that is lost by mimicking soul. A deep aping or mimicry that has adhered like a parasite until it sucks the vital juices and makes the malformations as of false flowers on shrubs, which are found to be stingings of insects or the warts on the plum tree. In a world where a remedy exists for every mischief, is there none for the sentimentalist? If it were only a boy's cracker to silence cats under dormitory windows. The points that glowed a little in yesterday's conversation were that North must succeed. That is sure, was sure for 30 or 60 years back, was in the education, culture, and climate of our people that they are bound to put through their undertakings. Our success is sure. Its roots are in our poverty, our Calvinism, our schools, our thrifty habitual industry, in our snow, east wind, and farm life and sea life. These able and generous merchants are the sons and grandsons of farmers and mechanics and sailors. In the caprice and credulity of people, all these rumors and opinions take their rise, to which Whigs and statesmen in cities attach great weight, shaking their heads and looking grave. But Kentucky, but Baltimore, but Wall Street and State Street. Be sure we had not thought of that. The rumors, the opinions are allowed to have importance, and therefore we must wait, and Congress is justified and the President is right in caution, and in suspending his purpose. But by listening thus in here and out there to each new report, one is left in a chronic puzzle and incapacity to move. By and by, a strong wind of a battle or of one energetic mind appears, and the whole drift and scud, with all its forms of bears, mountains, and dragons, vanishes out of sight, and the plain way of reason and right reappears once and forever. Why did we not obey it? This, only this, persists to be, and is forever wisdom and power. Reading. I wish only to read that which it would be a serious disaster to have missed. Now how many foreign or domestic opinions on our war shall I suffer from not knowing? I do not know that Lord Palmerston or Lord Russell's opinion or existence is of the least importance, not that fly of less. The human mind cannot be burned, nor bayoneted, nor wounded, nor missing. Thoreau. Quote, if you would abstain insight, avoid anatomy. Quote, it requires so much closer attention to the habits of the birds that if for that reason only I am willing to omit the gun. If we should ever print Henry's journals, you may look for a plentiful crop of naturalists. Young men of sensibility must fall an easy prey to the charming of Pan's pipe. Editor's note. Out of many pages of Mr. Emerson's selections from Thoreau's journal, a few are given here. End note. The river is my own highway, the only wild and unfenced part of the world hereabouts. How much of the world is widows' thirds, with a hired man to take negligent care of it? The constant inquiry which nature puts is, are you virtuous? Then you can behold me. Beauty, fragrance, music, sweetness, and joy of all kinds are for the virtuous. That I thought when I heard the telegraph harp today. June 1852. The perception of beauty is a moral test. How watchful we must be to keep the crystal well that we were made, clear, that it be not turbid by our contact with the world, so that it will not reflect objects. What other liberty is there worth having, if we have no freedom and peace in our minds, if our inmost and most private man is but a sour and turbid pool? I look back for the era of this creation, not into the night, but to a dawn for which no man ever rose early enough. Men may talk about measures till all is blue and smells of brimstone, and then go home and sit down and expect their measures to do their duty for them. The only measure is integrity and manhood. I am not so much reminded of former years as of existence prior to years. Ah, how I have thriven on solitude and poverty! I cannot overstate this advantage. If I would preserve my relation to nature, I must make my life more moral, more pure and innocent. The problem is as precise and simple as a mathematical one. I must not live loosely, but more and more continently. The air over these fields is a foundry full of molds for casting bluebirds' warbles. Of the seasons and winter. It is solid beauty. It has been subjected to the vicissitudes of millions of years of the gods, and not a single superfluous ornament remains. The severest and coldest of the immortal critics shot their arrows at and pruned it till it cannot be amended. At this season, 10th of May, the traveller passes through a golden gate on causeways, where these willows are planted, as if he were approaching the entrance of fairyland, and there will surely be found the yellow bird, and already from a distance is heard his note, a cha-cha-cha, cha-cha-cha. Ah, willow, willow, ah, could not he truly arrange for us the difficult family of the willows better than Boner or Barrett or Middletown? Editor's note. At the Battle of Bull Run on July 21st of the previous year, 2 sergeants and 3 privates of the Concord Company of the 5th Massachusetts Regiment were taken prisoners. After months of confinement, successively at Richmond, New Orleans, and Salisbury, North Carolina, they were exchanged and returned safely to Concord in June. The following are evidently notes of what Mr. Emerson said on the occasion of welcoming them home. End note. You men who come back have not lost your time. Certain truths have been imprinted on you. You have seen the world. You have learned somewhat of your country. Without dishonor, you have seen Virginia and Carolina. It has been true, though people have tried to disguise it for years, that a man of the free states could not travel on his necessary business in that country without seeing or hearing something on which it was necessary he should shut his eyes and ears. If he said what he thought, he was certain of injury or insult. If he did not speak, he lost his own respect. You have been able to see and to hear much disagreeable truth, without loss of your own honor. No one will hereafter be able to persuade you that no state of society is sweet and happy and enlightened, unless it is founded on stealing. You can teach us, and I know that your votes, your charities, your plans of life, and courses of action will draw incessantly on this painful experience of the last year. You have earned the freedom of this town and this state. We welcome you home to the houses and lands that are dear to you, to your old companions, and to new friends. We shall never see you without respect and gratitude. These are they who bore our sins on their shoulders, and by their sufferings we are at peace. Sweet are the uses of adversity, and I am sure that many a time in these weary weeks, by night and by day, our quiet landscape, the silent river, and the inland ponds, and the plain houses thereby, have loomed up in your fancy. And Fair Haven, and Walden Pond, and 9 Acre Corner, and the East Quarter Schoolhouse, you would have given a month's wages to look upon. July. I suppose the war does not recommend slavery to anybody. If it costs 10 years of war and 10 to recover the general prosperity, the destruction of slavery is worth so much. But it does not cost so much time to get well again. How many times France has been a war field? Every one of her towns has been sacked. The harvest has been 100 times trampled down by armies. And yet, when you suppose, as after the first Napoleon's time, that the country must be desolate, a year's labor, a new harvest, almost the hours of one's perfect summer day, create prodigious wealth, and repair the damage of 10 years of war. I read with entire complacency that part of the history of art when the new spiritualism set the painters on painting the saints as ugly and inferior men, to hint the indifferency of all circumstance to the divine exuberance, and I remember this with great satisfaction at the photographist's shop. Matthew Arnold writes well of, quote, the grand style, but the secret of that is a finer moral sentiment. 'Tis very easy for Alcott to talk grandly, he will make no mistake. It is certain that the poetic temperament of Channing will utter lines and passages inimitably by any talent. This is followed by an untranslated French quotation. Collins and Gray are examples in English verse, and Aunt Mary in prose, and Plotinus and Proclus in prose. Labor hides itself in every mode and form. Why are people so sensitive about the reputation of General McClellan? There is always something rotten about a sensitive reputation. Besides, is not General McClellan an American citizen? And is it not the first attribute and distinction of an American to be abused and slandered as long as he is heard of? La terrible dans la familiarité remains important. A man's connections must be looked after. If he surpasses everybody in mother wit, yet a scholar like the rest, be sure he has got a mother or father or aunt or cousin who has the uncorrupted slang of the street, the pure mud, and which is inestimable to him as spice and alterative, and which delights you in his rhetoric like the devil's tunes, who puts a slow time in church music. All Aunt Mary's language was happy, but inimitable as if caught from some dream. The art of the writer is to speak his fact and have done. Let the reader find that he cannot afford to omit any line of your writing because you have omitted every word that he can spare. You are not annoyed, are you, that your fine friends do not read you? They are better friends than you knew, and have done you the rarest service. Now write so that they must. When it is a disgrace to them that they do not know what you have said, you will hear the echo. Benefit of conceit. When you next write on conceit, have the good nature to see it as it is, a balsam, a sugar on the lip of the cup to sweeten the sad potation to all mortals. How kind this keeping the eyes shut! The little rhymester is just as much pleased with his vers de société as the poet with his images. On the whole is happier, for he thinks they are good, and the poet is always wretched at his shortcomings. On the bottom of the shell of the wood tortoise, Emis insculpta, is painted an oak leaf. The stem of the arum has the colors of the parrot's neck. Elizabeth Hoare found a tortoise eating a yellow toadstool a few days since. Ellery Channing finds the Podalira tinctoria to be the favorite flower of the humblebee. This is the end of Part 2 of Emerson's journal collection number 53, dating from the year 1862, when the author was 59 years old. Thank you for listening.